you were aware of this, but the latest poll on religion in the United States turned out to be a shocker. Let me backtrack and say there are two people over the years who are now since passed who I've paid very close attention to. One was a very old and yet emphysema, but famous church historian called Lyle Schaller. And Lyle Schaller was a very, very practical kinds of person. And one of the things he said years and years and years ago, he says, when you're in a congregation, you do not slow down for the summer. You do not stop for the summer. You do not put crap out for the summer. He said, you go the same thing year round. You show the same interest, the same emphasis, the same energy. You don't slow down because there's nothing way to start. That's what you do for a healthy congregation. And that's what we do at All Souls. We annoy everybody fall, spring, winter, and summer consistently. We followed, he was a great historian. A consultant, and he gave very good practical stuff. And I've tried to follow most of the stuff he's said over the years. Was really, really very good, regardless of what your background is. Secondly, was Martin Marty. Martin Marty was a church historian, and he kept on pointing out that fundamentalism in this country raises its head every 80 to 100 years like clockwork. What we saw with the beginning with the moral majority and all of the white evangelical stuff is right on target. But he also pointed out they shoot themselves in the foot and everybody else in the process, and as they raise, they dramatically fall. The latest statistics have showed, and I mentioned this a couple of times before, but this was the tip of the iceberg, the Southern Baptist Convention has lost over 2 million members, 2 million members in the last several years. The membership that is under 30 in the Southern Baptist Convention is only 8%. They are also one of the oldest groups in the United States in terms of age. The latest statistics show that in the last 15 years, white evangelical Protestants have dropped from 23% of the country to 14% and are declining quickly. Unitarian Universalists have increased dramatically, as have mainline Protestants, both of which came as a shock to everybody in the polling. So that arc of trying to imprint your own culture wars on everybody else, your own theology on everybody else, gets into an arc, and then it radically declines. So Martin Marty's thesis that every 80 is again playing itself out. And finally, I pointed out last time, for those of you who follow such things, the Southern Baptist Convention was shocked when Saddleback Church in California, the second biggest church in the Southern Baptist Convention, just ordained 3 women, 3, to its ministry. Yes, several heart attacks and hair falling out. I thought it was a riot myself. And moving along, let's say hello to everybody today. Nanette is there from Brooklyn, Connecticut. AJ and Holly are in Nashville at a medical thingy. We have thing 1 and thing 2. Thing 1 has finally shown wisdom and come back to Miami where she belongs. Did you get the thing at the door? Okay, Roy, who continually educates me with more Sufi wisdom, is from, I'm going to get this wrong, I want to say Bellevue. Bellingham, Washington, just below Vancouver by an hour or so. Pat is from north of Tampa. Melissa is near the golf course, just coming back from Marco Island. Great pictures of her kids out on Marco Island. Serge is with us today. We got Nick. We got Lucille. Now, Lucille, we've said hello to you before. Lucille is a friend of, where is she? Mary Grimmy. Well, welcome, Lucille. Lucille is doing a lot of work with her mother. Her mother is in her 90s, and Lucille is her major caregiver. So we welcome Lucille, and thank you for being with us again today. Mary Grimmy, I've known since 1985. You've seen her son, Donald, who's a tech, and you've seen a picture of Donald at the age of 2 with my giant deerhound, the Deacon, way back in the day. Daniel Sorkin is also from Forest Hills in Queens, and he is a friend of Pat Sullivan. and he visited with us last week. We've got, oh, come on. Tony Lee out in Miami Lakes. Kay Schweitzer is up in Port Orange. Chris Diaz has got some time off from work and he's in North Miami. Sarah is having done great penance, having a son known as Nick, and she's now living in Alabama. And so I guess we're all accounted for here today. All right. Having said that, let's take a look at where we were. Let's go back then to the beginning. We were talking about Hinduism getting started with indigenous theology and mythology. Mythology in religion does not mean a bunch of quackery. Mythology is how you tell stories to try to explain the truth as you see it. As you process stuff, how do you make sense of it? And storytelling and making of stories is a way to try to get a handle on all that you see. It's not quackery. It's a great art form, actually. The indigenous peoples in the Indus Valley area, which is a huge area that encompasses now what is now called Pakistan, Northwest India, and parts of Afghanistan. It existed at its prime about 4000 BCE. That's 6,000 years ago. It evolved because of the 7 rivers in the northwest part of what we now call India and Pakistan, leading also into the Indus River, which gets its beginnings, by the way, in Tibet. One of the things that we learn in this country is a lot about geography. The Great Plain in Tibet gives the birth to the Indus River. And so as the glaciers are now rapidly declining in Tibet because of weather and climate change, the whole Indian subcontinent is at risk. And I've told you before, India has had for 50 years, and it's trying to cover up, a sinking water table. It is really bad. Pakistan allowed for industrialization along the Indus River, and it's now clogged with silt and pollution, and they've had to close now hundreds of factories because they've almost destroyed the river going into the sea at the end. So climate change, industrialization, and just plain poor management have severely damaged the river system. For our purposes, the indigenous peoples had their own mythologies, and about 3,500 years ago, people from the Iranian area, and before that, north of the Caspian Sea, moved in, and they brought their mythologies. Over hundreds and hundreds of years and thousands of years, from 4000 BCE to about 2000 BC, the mythologies merged, admixtured, talked, more talked. In about 1500 BCE, 3,500 years ago, they were written down. The admixtures of indigenous feelings and thoughts and ideas were written down with the merged groups that came in. And that will form the basis of what we now call Hinduism. There are gazillions of types of Hinduisms. Let me say right off the bat, I think one of the gems of Hinduism is that it has made no attempt to systematize and make everybody believe the same thing. You might say one of the gems of Hinduism is that it's perfectly fine, and I think we should really like this, to believe contrary things that totally disagree with each other, and that's just fine. You might say in the Hindu way of thinking, that's just the nature, it's the way it is. You can believe this, you can believe that, they have nothing to do with each other, they're contradictory, but they feed you both. Does that make sense? Did you ever find yourself believing contrary things, they both feed you, and intellectually you say, well, that's not rational. You might say Hinduism predated the idea that rationality has to rule everything. There are things that are irrational that make perfectly good sense and feed you. In short, Hinduism predated the idea that STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, are only part of the equation. What you feel, what feeds you, what makes sense to you is not always stemmed. Not everything can be quantified and scientifically laid out, if that's making sense to everybody. In our day and age, we like to stem everything, but that doesn't answer all the stuff. To wit, we brought up the question, what is the soul? you all flooded me with your ideas of what the soul can or cannot be. It was incredible. None of it fit with STEM. None of it at all. Then we branched into, what do you think about a soul and animals? And then you got animals and trees. And then, of course, Ron, his lordship, his grace, his worship, then suggested, what about galaxies? And of course, that predates the whole idea of what? STEM theories, where there are multiple galaxies, and what we're seeing in multiple universes, what we're seeing is just a copy of other universes that are out there. So oddly enough, ancient thought predated all this. And then you get Buddhism coming along that suggested that enlightenment is in the cosmos everywhere. I find it fascinating that ancient Hinduism and ancient Buddhism really, if you will, got it together and was not limited to this planet, this galaxy, or everything that you and I can see. They also realized you could have competing ideas and have, as the Chinese call it, a unity of opposites. That's another phrase I like, a unity of opposites. So all of these ancient religions, if you will, said there are things that may make sense scientifically or whatever else, but they're things you feel. And both can feed you. Both are necessary. I find that absolutely fascinating. And I wish when I was growing up that somebody had told me that. I don't know about the rest of you, but my growth was incredibly stunted emotionally by trying to be put in a box, and the box didn't fit. I don't know if that happened to anybody else, but the box that I was trying to be stuffed in was not me. And I kept on thinking there was something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with me. It's just that I didn't fit that box. I needed, am I making sense to anybody? I hope I am, because I wish I would have had courses in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, for instance, when I was in 8th grade. These would have been great, great moments in therapy, pastoral help, and formation of who I am. But it's better late than never. Okay, major Hindu beliefs. In the Vedas, there was the argument there is one divine reality. And we'll get to that, we'll push on this again. That one divine reality, and I asked you if you would accept or find helpful the idea of a giant diamond. A diamond, and we put this in idea, if we were in my classroom, when we used to meet face to face, I would have a student stand up and embarrass the hell out of them. They would say, "You'll pay for this, karma clause, karma." And I would have a student stand up and I'd say, "You can't see the front of the student, but the student's there. Those of you in the front can't see the back of the student. The student is still there. Those on each side, you get where I'm going with this. The students, I said, okay, that's divine reality if you want an example. Think if this person, though, is 10 times the size and multifaceted. And as we move this diamond with the facets near the light changes the color of the facets. So the facets, not only you can't see them all, but they change in their color and their dynamism. Or I said, if that doesn't work, think of a house. Think of the sun as divine reality. No matter where you are in the house, you can't see all of it, but you can see the light. And when the light, and at nighttime, you know it's still there, because when you wake up in the morning, there's light. Before you go to bed, there's the evening light as well. Or if that doesn't work, I said, think of a kaleidoscope. It's one thing, you put it to your eye, you mess around with it, the colors are all over the place. It's one, but it's multifaceted. The students like the diamond eye, the diamond better. They get that as multifaceted. I asked you to read that thing again and to remember what Brahman is. Let me just go over that and then we'll get to the Atman. If you're going to argue about divine reality, Hinduism suggests the problem with Judaism traditional, Christianity traditional, and Islam traditional is their understanding of divine reality is too static. It's too confining. It's too boxed. What is the traditional definition of God? If you will, by the way, I sent you the 4 gods that Americans believe in today. I sent it as an attachment. If you ask what God is, you'll say God is all creating, God is all knowing, and God is all powerful. And Hindus would say, that's it? That's it. It's rather boring. It lacks a dynamism. It lacks an energy. So again, when you look at the definition of what Brahman, that one divine reality, is from the Bhagavad Gita, it is probably, in my own understanding, the best single an attempt using human language to describe divine reality. Now, I'm sure there are others out there that are equally as good, but this is the best that I'm aware of. I am the beginning, the lifespan, and the end. I'm the mind. I am death that snatches all. I am the source. I am time without end. I'm the beginning, the middle, and the end in creation. All things beautiful speech, all things spiritual, all things intelligence. I am the divine seed of all that lives. In this world, nothing animate or inanimate exists without me. Whatever in this world is powerful, beautiful, or glorious that you may know to have come forth is only a fraction of my power and glory. It's a pretty substantial definition. Go ahead, Roy, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that both Judaism, I mean, when you really get down to it, I mean, like the central prayer of Judaism talks about God being beyond your understanding, beyond your ability to define. Orthodox Jews don't write God for that reason. The same thing is true in Islam. I'm sure it's there in Christianity too, but I don't know where to find it. But in Islam, it's really front and center. This idea that God is, again, ineffable, that there are these qualities which are, like you described, like facets of a diamond, and beyond knowing and beyond understanding.
I guess what I should have phrased it better. People that I know that practice in the traditional things come up with a very static understanding. Regardless of what's on paper, it comes out very static.
Yeah.
And that's you know, I see that, a very static kind of limited understanding, and there's a lack of energy and into everything.
Does that not
in practice? In practice,
does that not happen in Hinduism?
Hinduism is all over the place. It's like this pulsating amoeba that's all over the place, and it doesn't like boundaries. And that's what I find fascinating about it. To wit, I think one of the things that surprises me about Hinduism was Gandhi, that famous thing from Gandhi that I read every so often. Gandhi was asked, I keep it right here because I've always been fascinated. Gandhi was asked by this guy called Louis Fisher in India during World War II. In 1942, when I was his house guest, in the middle of World War II, he's in India, the writer, a black and white print of Jesus was in his hut. It was the only thing in his hut. And under it, Gandhi had written, "He is our peace." So I asked him, I said, "You are not a Christian," I said. And Gandhi replied, "I'm a Christian and a Hindu and a Muslim and a Jew." Now, the funny thing about it is I could relate to that because I like Jesus's teachings. I can't stand the teachings about Jesus. I love parts of Sufi Islam. I love parts of Taoism. I love parts of Buddhism. So I get, you might say, my tapestry of trying to make sense of what's around us is made up of giant threads from all of these. So, but I come to that over a period of time. Nobody introduced me to any of these religions when I was young. So I come to this later, and I'm glad that I'm able to find these. It's better late than never, because all of these have fascinating energies and dynamics of ways of looking at things. Now, the next thing they talk about Atman, but the thing where Hinduism starts, even in the Vedas 3,500 years ago, it is understood in their writing that divine reality is in every living thing. And that divine reality is called the Atman. So it is understood that every living entity, including you and I, have some divine reality within us. Now, you're going to see this in two different stories, for instance, in the Hebrew Bible. In the earliest story, by the way, just to bring you up to date, because most people forget this, there are two creation stories in the Hebrew Bible, and they're written hundreds of years apart. So the theory goes. One theory is that the Garden of Eden represents a whole anthropomorphic view of God. God is they try to make sense of God using human language. God walks, God talks, because it's the only way they could get their mind about how do you talk about this God that creates. So you get in the story of the Garden of Eden, in the very beginning, God picks up dust and breathes into the dust ruah. It's divine. It's the divine spark. It's the divine energy. Breathes into this, and from this, dust becomes animated, an entity that has divine energy and divine reality, and it calls man in English. In English. And so the idea in the first creation story is that human beings also have this sense of something divine in them. The second creation story, I don't know if you're aware of this, follows the Gilgamesh creation epic. The scholars are arguing the story of the 7 days in Genesis 1 is a direct riff off of the creation days in the Gilgamesh creation epic, which have 7 of creation, A, B, 1, 2 through 7. What the Jewish scholars who are in exile did is they said, rather than the gods created, they changed and said Yahweh Elohim created. So they accepted the science of the way things were created, but they changed the theology, if that's making sense to all of you. So they accepted the theology. They're living in Babylon. They're in exile. They've been already 2 generations in Babylon. And they're trying to make sense of it because they believe they're going to go back at some point from where they were exiled. But what did they have to take with them? So they took the science of the day and changed it to Yahweh Elohim. And in this story, again, you get the idea that in the beginning, God created this. And then somewhere near the end, God said, let us create humankind in our image. So the idea that the image involves then not just a blank black and white portrait, but a very vital portrait. The image has a power in this. Now, by the way, do any of you know what it means in the Hebrew Bible? It says, let us. Who is the us? Does anybody know? Anybody know in Genesis 1 who the us is? Let us create humankind in our image, and in our image, man and woman were created. No, the image is a heavenly council. In antiquity, it was understood as early as 2,500 years ago that God was not alone. Now you're going to see where images come from, angels and all the rest of that. There was the belief that God, I'm not sure how this came about, but there was a belief that God could not be alone. So there was a heavenly council. What they don't do is tell us who's on the heavenly council, and they don't tell us how you can become a member. I mean, how do you apply? Seriously, how do you apply to become a member of the heavenly council? I mean, I want to know. I don't get anything on the internet. Like, you want to become a member of the heavenly council. They're 2-3-year terms. Nobody tells you. But you can see now where ideas of angels getting kicked out of the heavenly council. And you see this later on, 200 years later in Job. And by the way, everybody screws this up. Satan was not bad in Job. Satan was a member of the heavenly council. And his job was to patrol the earth and come back and report to the council what's going on. You also need to know, by the way, the story of Job was ruined because the first 2 chapters were added long after the story was written. The first 2 chapters of Job, and we remember that from last summer, were added, and they really messed it up. The original story was probably Edomite, and it's talking about what happens when bad things happen to good people. Because that is a question that all human beings ask. Why do bad things happen to us? Why do we get sick? Why do we hurt? Why does our soul get damaged? Why do these things happen? And that's been asked from day one. So in these 2 creation stories, God either breathes into the ground, from earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. From earth you came, to earth you return. The famous thing at a funeral service from some liturgies. From the earth you came, to earth you return, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Or are we created in the very image of the divine? Hinduism argues from the very beginning that the divine already planted a seed within you. You'll also see this reflected, by the way, in two passages in early Christian literature. In the Gospel of Luke, it's totally buried. In the 17th chapter of Luke, the 20th chapter, 20th verse, the Pharisees said to Jesus, "Where is the kingdom of God?" And Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is within you and around you." That gets totally lost. Also in the Gospel of Thomas, Thomas has Jesus as a messenger. Jesus's job is to get you the message that the divine is within you. And by accessing the divine within you and around you, you know that you become whole and that you're all related to divine reality. Now, I'm trying to say that the idea that Hinduism writes down that there is something divine in all of us will then spread through other religions and other cultures, none of them realizing it's first written down in the ancient Vedas in Hinduism. But it gets started there. Now, I'm sure there are other religions out there that thought the same thing, but the Vedas are the first ones to write them down. And some of that divine reality is within us. And so the argument within Hinduism is, then what do you need to do? You need to get what? Your Atman back together to be one with Brahman. Now, you might ask the question very quickly, how do we become separated to begin with? There are 1,000 different theories about how we get separated. And then muddying it up is what happened when some of the divine has relations with the mortals, and you get what in the process. In the Hebrew Bible, the 6th chapter, and nobody knows where this came from. I read this because I think it's one of the funniest things in the Bible. The sons of God went and took wives of all the mortal women that they were interested in. And they had children. By the way, they didn't ask, they took. It makes it very clear. They took, they grabbed, they chose, lots of them. Wifelets. That's a phrase I read the other day. Wifelets. I've never heard of that phrase. Wifelets. That means you're many wives. And they had these women all over the place, and they had children. In this 6th chapter of Genesis, God doesn't get mad at his sons. He gets mad at mortals. I've never understood that either. It's your sons that are messing around and grabbing women, not the other way around. So he gets mad at women, mad at mortals, so your lives are 120 years. But the offspring, who are the offspring? The Nephilim, heroes of old, warriors of renown. Not what you get in the games, not what you get in Enoch. No, these are good kids. These are good people. Heroes of old, warriors of renown. And what is the takeoff on that? Of course, Hercules. Hercules. And all the mythologies of what happened when you have the mortal and the immortal gather and you have offspring. They're not fully God, they're not fully man, they are somehow both. And ultimately, Christian mythology will also adopt this. Remember, in the 2nd century, now you become getting acquainted to the idea there was a virgin birth. That will come 2 generations after Jesus lives and dies. The first gospels to mention this are Matthew and Luke. They're written 2 generations after Jesus dies, and both stories are different. Mark and John have no virgin birth, no birth narrative at all, but it begins to creep in. How do we talk about Jesus who is different? All right, Pat, say that who, I don't know who that is. Say that again. You lost me on that. Who's that? You put something on the chat. What is that?
He's the author of, I can't think of the book, The 12th Planet. And his theory is that the 12th planet has I think it's a 3,000 year circle, orbit. And it was near Earth 3 or 6,000 years ago. And some people from another planet came down and they became the Nephilim. And they were called the gods because they had other powers beyond the earthlings. And they were the ones that are mentioned in the Bible and as the Nephilim.
Okay, that's a theory. That's
and
also...
he wrote another, or maybe 12 books on that topic, and he was very well received in the, I guess, 70s and 80s.
Okay. By the way, I did not read the UFO report. Did anybody read the UFO report? There was supposed to be a report that came out last week from the government. Did it ever come out?
I know something about it. I heard a radio program about it. So,
What did they
Um,
say?
well, they said there wasn't any evidence that these are extraterrestrials. They had about 4 or 5 different possible explanations, including one catch-all. They just said other. But what else did they mention? Unusual atmospheric phenomena, misinterpretations, tired pilots. I don't remember exactly. But, I'm sure this will satisfy no one. But, of all the possible explanations of unidentified lights and things seen in the sky, I think intelligent extraterrestrials is a very far-fetched one. But that's my opinion.
My only thought about this is one of mathematics. And the mathematics is if we have all these gazillion planets just in one galaxy, and we have gazillions of galaxies, I always leave the door open.
That's right.
I'm absolutely convinced that we are not as smart as we think we are. And so I leave the door open. So when my students ask me, what do you think about this? I said, I always leave the door open. What I think, I'm convinced, is more limited than I realized. Every time I teach a class, I realize how much I don't know. And every time I'm with you people, I even realize how much less I don't know. And I mean that in a good way. So I leave myself open. At this point, nothing would surprise me. And I don't mean that rudely at all. Rudely. I just think there's so many possibilities out there just from a mathematical point of view. We've got 1 or 2 million planets in our galaxy that could be just like Earth, is the latest thing from the astronomers that could survive. They could have people living on them like we live. Then that's just our galaxy. Our galaxy is what? One of a gazillion galaxies in the universe, and we don't even know how many universes there are. So that's why I say nothing would surprise me. I leave it open. Maureen, you were going to say something?
Yeah, but the chance that anything on another planet would evolve to look anything like we do,
I didn't say look
unless,
like.
Unless you actually know biological evolution and developmental processes in the various phyla of life and how cells have been randomly organized through evolution, they're always thinking that extraterrestrials are going to look like other humanoids.
I didn't
why aren't
say
they going
that.
to look like a giant octopus or a giant fungus or a giant
Maria, I never said they look like us. I just said nothing would surprise me in terms
people.
of, well, I meant that in
Okay,
a
but
bigger sense of the word.
the way they're often portrayed is basically sort of, bipeds with a head, arms, legs, grayish skin, but they're kind of like, clearly like human conception creatures. And as Marina's
Right,
pointing out, that's very unlikely to be the fact. And number two, the fact that life is probably widespread throughout the galaxy and the universe, maybe even intelligent life, but we have no evidence for it. You have to realize the distances involved from star to star to start realizing that A, travel between stars is extremely difficult, and B, it's hard to believe that intelligent creatures came all the way from some other star system just to abduct occasional women and have their way with them. It's like, it's about as much sense as the whole thing about the sons of God having relations with human women, taking them. I think it's modern mythology, but again, that's my opinion.
Well, that's the way we're all over the place. We've got different points of view. I just think I keep an open mind personally. Nothing would surprise me one way or the other. But I certainly don't think, I agree with Maureen, if there is other things out there, I'm sure they're not going to look like us. The other point of view I have is the reason we have not been visited lately is because there's a big yellow tape around our planet that says do not cross, because if there are things out there, they've looked at the way we behave and decided this is not a place to visit. Bombs going off, people slaughtering each other, genocide, people picking each other off and think, would you want a vacation here? You're going to vacation in Afghanistan where the Taliban are marching around. You're going to vacation in Haiti right now. Oh, yes. My wife is furious. Colombians are involved in this. She absolutely had a fit. Douglas Adams, where are you when we need you? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Yes. He was before his time. So for that, by the way, did any of you, have any of you ever read the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? All right, this is, there is a scene in there, by the way, a part of the book, which I think should have gotten a Pulitzer. They're asking, what is the answer to the universe? This is one of the great things of humor. I still remember this from 40, 50 years ago. So they ask, what is the answer to the universe? 10,000 generations later, this mainframe kicks on. 10,000 generations. So they approach the mainframe and they say to him, do you have the answer? What is the answer to the universe? And the mainframe says, yes.
Yeah.
And they said, well, he says, you're not going to like this. You're not going to like this. They said, tell us, they're screaming. Huge mob outside. He goes, 42.
Actually, the
There's
question
dead
was,
silence. Huh?
the question was, what is the answer to life, the universe, and everything?
And everything, right. And there's dead silence. He goes, 42. And there's like, what? 42. He said, I told you wouldn't like the answer to this. One of the great, that's why it's good to have a sense of humor when coming with some of the great things. What was that question exactly? What is
What is the meaning of life, the universe, and everything?
And Roy says, oh yeah, this is under construction. We're sorry for the inconvenience. At the end, it says under construction, sorry for the inconvenience. I love the authorship here because you had a great sense of humor. Yeah, with a great sense of humor about we don't know everything. And it was just making fun of us about, and that's true. And we have multiple opinions. So you have the Atman within you. The question is, according to Hindu scholarship, it's very simple. You need to unite the divine within you to the divine around. But then there's the interesting thing called Maya. And the argument is that we are under the illusion that that's not really important. What is really, yes, go ahead.
It is everything, because Maya connects with our STEM studies. Maya speaks to how the human brain takes in information through the senses and interprets. I mean, it's illusion. Everything is illusion according to Maya. And according to scientific research, what we perceive in our human brains is so individual based on, you know, our chemistry, the electronic energy in our bodies, our life experiences, all of that put together. And what we experience isn't in fact reality. As the ancient Indians knew, we all see a version of reality. Back to your facets.
And they would further that is what people get hung up on one facet is getting all the toys. Spending your time, what is really important is getting the toys, making money, and getting ahead. So you get sidetracked about you and putting it on. I find that interesting. So the whole thing is, you know, is it about connecting the divine within divine to become whole, if you will, using kind of our language today. And they said, no, you get sidetracked. You get sidetracked into everything under the sun. And I ask my students, and I have a lot of fun with this, why are you really in college? I want you to be honest. And everybody says, with the exception of one or two, said, I'm here to make money. And I said, okay, what you're really being honest about is you're here to get a piece of paper from an AA to then get another piece of paper, a BA or a BS, so you can go out and make money. And some you'll need to get more than that, an MA or whatever have to get to make more money. Occasionally, in every class, I will have one student who says, I'm actually here to learn. And you'd usually be one or two. And I said, then you remind me of the ancient Neanderthals. And I said, that's a good thing. Because they found in ancient Neanderthal villages, there was always a place on the outside. It had its own ring around it, who was the shaman who not only knew medicine, but also the history and the story of the village and the people. That person's job was to collect knowledge and be a resource, and if you be a living library. And I said, there are some of us, I wasn't one of them, I said, there are some of us in this class, one person is going to be a resident, a collector of knowledge. They are here to actually learn and to become, if you will, that person which becomes a resource, and we need those. But I said, are the rest of us here really to get a piece of paper, to get another piece of paper, to enjoy the good life? And they all said, yeah. And you know, I hate to tell you this, and this is a horrid confession. Why did I go to college? To get a piece of paper. Why? So I could get into divinity school. I only applied to one divinity school. I don't know what I was thinking. So I went to Union, and I remember I would finish Union and I was in the ministry, and this is awful. I don't know if I should tell you people this. This is really, really awful. So I'm looking at where I want to go in the future, and I realized that where I wanted to go, they wouldn't look at you unless you had a doctorate. So I applied to the toughest doctoral program for the field that I was interested in, and it was at Boston University in my geographic area. I did it not because, this is horrible, because I needed to learn that much more. I hate to tell you all this, I learned more being with people than I did in the classroom. That's a horrible confession, but I learned more from interrelating with people and making mistakes and being corrected and helped with in the actual, this is the old-fashioned phrase, in the field, than I did in the classroom, because I found a lot of the classroom was artificial. A lot of the classroom was a lot of flowing tapestries of BS, and a lot of the stuff did not relate to anything I was doing in reality. Now, the one thing you might like is the doctoral program I was in, you could not apply until you've had 5 years of actual parish experience, and you had to be in the parish when you're in the program. That's why I liked it. It's because it cut down the artificiality a lot. But the reason I went in is not to learn. It was because I needed another piece of paper. And let me tell you something, how this happened to be true. Do you know every job I had after that, every job interview I had after that, not one committee, not one, ever asked me, what did you do in your Union experience or your Boston University experience academically that really spoke to you? Not once was I ever asked that question. I was said, oh, you went to Union, went to BU, excellent. Then they went on to other stuff, but nobody asked what formulated, what really spoke to you, what did you really do your work to inform where you are today? And I thought that was a travesty, an absolute travesty, all that work. And by the way, you might find this interesting. My best work was not my doctoral work. It was my master's work. But I chose not to go academic. I chose to go in the parish, or the parish chose me. I don't know how that works to this day. And then I wind up teaching. It was a weird way around it. And then both. But I'm telling you, it's interesting about what we do with academics and teaching. And it's interesting about getting sidetracked. Now, the sad thing is, while I was getting all this academic stuff, I'm not sure I did very much in learning about me and repairing my soul and understanding what it was. And so a lot of academics, but what did I do to nurture? Am I making sense to anybody? What do we do? What do we do when we're like in grad school to nurture? It's all this academic thesis, meeting with, arguing with professors. I mean, but what did I do to learn to mature? And very frankly, not very much. I don't know, by the way, if when I was 23 and 24 and 25, I would have even appreciated what this class has to offer today in terms of growing up. Is that making sense to anybody? I don't know what you, well, I'm so much older than everybody here. Yes, I am. Yeah, you say I know better. I am ancient of days. And so I'm just saying, I don't know if back then I would have even appreciated a class like this. Is that making sense to all of you too? Would I have even appreciated a class like that? So I think the interesting thing is, as you move along your journey, you still have opportunities to grow. If that makes sense, which I think is really, really, really healthy. I think that's really healthy. So the Atman then, is there a sense of something you would call divine or special within you? And I suspect all of you are going to have very, very many different attitudes and different ideas about that. So next class, what I'd like you to do is make some notes about what you would think is special, how you would define that, or what that is about you. You could say your personality, your soul, what it is. What is that you think that's special about you? And by the way, don't make this a master's thesis. Try and make it pithy, if you will, short, so I can have a chance to listen to everybody. You know, what is it special, if there is anything special? Do you call it a soul? Do you call it your unique personality? Are they one and the same? Thank you, Maureen. Brevity is the soul of wit. Yes. What is it? What is it about us? What does it make to ask questions? What is it? One of the things, by the way, I ask about this group all the time is, why do we actually listen to each other? I don't know if you're aware of this. One of the biggest problems that liberal groups have is they really don't enjoy each other's differences. I'm serious about that. Yeah, on paper they do, but in reality they don't. They fight too much. Person A thinks their ideas are the best. Person B says you're an idiot. Person C says, would you two quit fighting? You all tend to actually listen to each other and respect differences of opinion. That is unique. Not to give you swelled heads, but it's unique. So when I ask you next time, share what you would call a soul, an Atman, how you would define that, what makes sense to you. I know you'll listen to each other. And I listen too. Does that work for everybody? Can we do that? Okay, then let's spend some time then wrestling with each of us, sharing, like, what does that mean? What are we? Who are we? And by the way, I don't know about this. Does anybody ever ask you that question very much? We're all so much going about work. We're doing all of our own jobs we have to do. We're all wrapped up in our own whatever we've got to do for the day. And how many times does somebody ask you, what does it mean to be you? What is that? Do you know what I'm saying? And so we ask questions like that here. So just share with how you approach that. Is there a soul? Is there Atman within you? What is that about? Is there something about how you merge with divine reality? And by the way, do play around with the idea. Can you have different things? Yeah, you're right. It's not a question that people ask you, Daniel. You're right, Daniel. You're right. That's absolutely true. People would look at you weird if you did. You're at a cocktail party, you're at a bunch of people gathering. You're munching on something and says, what do you think about your soul? Right, that's right. That's not the kind of thing you would. I'm sorry, that's a good point. Good point. But by the way, I want you to keep in mind the Hindu idea of having many things can be disagreeing with each other and not be rational and not be consistent. And you can have them both, and that can be very helpful to you. And also think about when you were growing up, did people try to put you in a box and you didn't fit in the box? You needed really a lot more boxes. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. One quick, in one tweet, sum up your Atman. Oh, I like that. In one tweet, sum up your Atman. That's an interesting one. In one tweet, sum up your Atman. Who came up with that? Your sister did. All right. This is interesting. I now find that my birth father's family is much more compatible to who I am than the way I grew up. That came as quite a shock. I'm much more in common with Pat and Doug and my actual first cousins than I do with anybody else on the other side of the family. Better late than never. Okay, a tweet. I like that. In one tweet. That's good then. That's your job. In one tweet, sum up your Atman. Okay, before we go, where does the time go? Let's go around, say hello to everybody. Cousin Doug in Munich is attending actually a memorial dinner, I guess for somebody who passed. Himself, his lordship, his grace, his worship, he's visiting one of his estates in the greater UK. Yeah, I'll do the stop recording in a second. We want to go by and say goodbye to everybody. And then again, AJ and Holly, Maureen and Pat, Lucille, thank you so much for taking care of your ma. Thank you so much for all that you do. Melissa, thank you for bringing Lucille along and having her visit with us. Pat, north of Tampa. Roy, who sends, by the way, Roy sends me stuff all the time. And the thing about it is I actually read what he sends and it gets me all new ideas, which should annoy me, but I find that fascinating that I'm already over here in other things, which I like. Nick, thank you much for helping out Kay. Mary Grimmy from Tampa, who I've known since 1985. Daniel, thank you again for being with us from New York, from Queens.
Welcome.
From Tony Lee, who's out in Miami Lakes. Serge is with us. Kay Schweitzer from Port Orange. So blessings and peace with a tweet. Oh God, I can't believe we started tweets. You're Atman. Okay, we see you next week then, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.